So you have been using no functions up till now. You've been using them, you haven't been writing them. So you've been doing a little bit of this logic stuff, etc. But at some point, a file is kind of a too big thing to organize your code. So what you want to do is organize your code in a concise way. So that's what functions are about. Okay, question. Do we need Brightspace journal logs? Yes, we do. So in these functions, why do we have them? We want to be able to reuse our code. You can, in particular, in the same class, you can often be doing the same thing again and again where just a value changes. Looking back at your math, where you have these fx equals x plus 2 or x squared plus x plus 5, you probably remember those kind of functions. In computing, we have functions that can do that and can do more. So functions can change variables, they can hold variables, etc. So that are functions. So we can reuse our code. We can actually also use it to manage complexity. Because if we have a function with a certain functionality, what we can then do is to basically make sure that this function does so that how to perform the function of the function is only discussed kind of in the body of the function. But when you want to use it, you do not need to think about how to perform that function. And another really important part of functions is that you can give names to functionality. So rather than having a block that says, okay, this is how I'm going to use this function, you can give it a name, and it makes the rest of your code much more readable. And the function block, it's clear what it's for, so you even have that to be quite easy to understand. So what does this look like? So this looks like basically hello world. In this particular case looks like this. So we have a hello and we print. So we have a function. We start out with def for define. Then we have the name of the function, and then we have the parentheses that give us the list of parameters. In this case, there are no parameters, so it's an empty list. And then we have inside this as a function body. Like in our logic, we have the indentation, and our hello world is, so we print hello in this function. So and then we call this function by just giving the name of the function and the actual parameters we want to use. In this case, there are none, so we don't give parameters. If we did hello hello, we would do the same thing twice. Of course, print is also a function. So we have seen print, we have seen range. Range just gives us a number of numbers. The len function as well is a function that gives us the length of anything that is kind of list-like. So how do you define your own function then? In detail. So we start with the def keyword. Then we have our name. We have any parameter that we need and a colon at the end. Then you put your documentation string after that, and yes, it works if you don't put the documentation string. And you can, so the pound sign or the hash, whatever you want to call it, that's comments. So you can do that, and then you have as many lines as you need to perform the task, and then you can have a return keyword that gives you a result for your function. So if you have a function with a result, you can then say print name whatever parameter you have, and then the print function is past the result of calling your function. So there is one thing that we need to think about is the keyword none. That is a kind of a return type for a function that does not return anything. So how does this work? We have a function hello here that doesn't return anything. So if we then have, so what we can do is then we can look, is the return of hello none, is the return type, then we just print just as expected, because hello does not return anything. There's no return keyword. And a good thing to remember is that defining a function just puts that name, makes that name available to use later. It does not call your function. You can call a function 0 or many times. So yes, the pound is a comment. So it doesn't do anything. So we have a variable here that we can assign the result of the name, as I said. And the style guide says that you should put 2 lines between a function and the rest, just to give a little bit more clarity. So one of the things that you might want to do in cases is like, okay, I need to get a lot of user input. You might say, okay, yeah, every time you get that, I'm just going to do that then and there. But it's much easier to define a function such as getNumber, where we can say, okay, I just have a function that gets me numbers between a minimum and a maximum. And we implement that by first starting with an input where we ask for a number from our reader. So you should be able to see my mouse now. So we ask for the input here, and then we convert that input into an int. And then we say, okay, as long as the value is not between the minimum and the maximum, we update the answer with a try again input. So we basically loop until we have an answer that's within the range. And yes, this does not check that the input is actually a number. So it could crash for that, but that's at this point not necessary. It's just an example. But that's the idea about functions. You can encapsulate this needed behavior in a place where you can really benefit from it. So, and then you can do something like, okay, for a month, get a number between 1 and 12. For a day, get a number between 1 and 31. And that 31 does not have to be a literal. If you want to do this even better, you can say, okay, after I got the month, I'm going to check for the month how many days that month had, and then I'm going to pass that amount of months into the get number for days so that it becomes dynamic depending on what month that the user gave. So on February we would have 28 or 29 if it's a leap year like this year. So these numbers do not have to be static, they can be variables. So, and then you can use the templates to put in that thing in a print statement. So then there is an important thing to think about with function, that is scope. So if we have this function greetUser, we basically, so what it does, it puts a name into from an input, and then you can print that out and stuff like that. What is important is that name variable that is in greetUser only exists in that function. Not only does it exist in that function, it only exists in that particular function call. Or every time you call that function, it creates a new variable for that particular call of the function with the name where you can store that, and it disappears afterwards. So if you call greetUser inside greetUser, you would have 2 copies of the name variable. So as that slide shows, when we use the print in the bottom, that name doesn't actually exist. So then modules. So we can organize our code into modules. So what you often do is you create modules where you put a lot of functions inside that have a common functionality. And what you can then do is you can import that module in any Python program to get to reuse stuff. So when that works like on this slide, we have the import keyword and then we have the file name without the py where we get it from, and then you can use it. You can also import slightly different way to get it straight without having to use the .name bit.